Hi, and welcome to another episode of the Bible Book by Book. Today I want to talk to you about a Jewish teaching technique called Remez, R-E-M-E-Z. And what the rabbis would do, and Jesus uses this really cleverly, is when you're asked a question or something is stated and you want to respond, rather than giving a clear answer, you might use a piece of scripture, a line of scripture, it's incredibly clever. Rather than giving the line you want to give, you might give a line pre or post. So you say something that you're not actually saying. So when somebody asks you a question, you can give a coded answer, or you give an answer that only those that understand will understand, if that makes sense. And this is why so many times the Pharisees and the Sadducees seem to get really angry at Jesus, but yet we're reading the passage thinking, well, why are they getting angry with him? He's not really said anything. And it's this idea of Remez, and we'll look at this in other examples at other times. But I want to give you an example today from the story of Zacchaeus. Zacchaeus was a tax collector. We're told that Zacchaeus lived in a town called Jericho. Now, Jericho predominantly was a place where the Sadducees lived. The Sadducees believed that they had to stay ritually pure and clean. The currency in the area was Roman coins, and these Roman coins had heads and images of Roman gods and Greek gods on them. Therefore, the Sadducees believed that the coins and the money that was in trade was unclean, so they would not touch money. But what the Sadducees did do was take temple tax, and they would take it from Jericho into the temple. But their problem was the money that they would have got given was unclean money. So they employed men to be these tax collectors that would collect the Roman money. They would then turn the money into Jewish money and then give the Jewish money to the Sadducees, and the Sadducees would take the Jewish clean money into the temple. So they'd employ these tax collectors to do this. And essentially it was like condemning people to judgment, because they knew whoever they employed, they were going to be unclean. And if they were unclean, you weren't allowed to go near them, you couldn't go in their home. So these tax collectors that they employed were employed by the religious people to be unclean. And these tax collectors were not allowed to touch people. If they touched somebody, that person would be unclean. So we've got this little story here of Zacchaeus, who was a tax collector in Jericho. His job would have been to have taken the unclean money, turn it into Jewish money, and then give it on to the Sadducees to take to the temple. Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through. A man was there by the name of Zacchaeus. He was the chief tax collector and was wealthy. He wanted to see who Jesus was, but being a short man, he could not because of the crowd. Now, let me just put this to you. Why did he not just get the front of the crowd? He's the chief tax collector. In other words, he was one of the key finance men in this town. Why is he not at the front? He can't be at the front of the crowd because he can't touch people. He's unclean. So he couldn't be there. So he's actually literally climbed a tree. So this idea that Zacchaeus has climbed a tree just because he's short, what's kind of true? It's more than that. Because he's short and because he's unclean, he can't be at the front of the crowd. So he's climbed the tree. And then it goes on, the story goes on. So he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore tree to see him, since Jesus was coming that way. When Jesus reached the spot, he looked up and said, "Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today." Now, Jesus couldn't have stayed at his house because he was ritually unclean. He physically was unclean. If Jesus had touched him, he shouldn't go into the temple in the future. No good Jewish rabbi would go near somebody who was unclean. Somebody that touched unclean money wouldn't go near a rabbi. So the fact that Jesus says, "I want to come and stay at your house," is pretty profound and rebellious and provocative. Verse 7, all the people saw this and began to mutter, "He has gone to be the guest of a sinner. He's gone to be the guest of an unclean man." That made no sense. That is not what rabbis did. That was far from the truth of what would happen. But Zacchaeus stood up and said, "Lord, look, Lord. Here and now I give half of my possessions to the poor, and if I've cheated anybody about anything, I will pay back 4 times the amount." Good stuff. Zacchaeus is realizing that he is a sinner. He's obviously taken money, extra money. But then verse 9, really, this is where the Remez comes in. Jesus says to him, today salvation has come to this house because this man too is the son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to, and it says, seek and save the lost. He's come to seek and save the lost, of which Zacchaeus was. But let me get this. Where does that line come from? That line comes from Ezekiel chapter 34. Ezekiel chapter 34 is a whole passage about how God has had enough of religious leaders, and how religious leaders were so focused on themselves. They would eat well, they would clothe themselves well, they cared for themselves. They had not cared for the sheep. And the passage says there are bad shepherds, and the religious leaders have become bad shepherds. These shepherds were not interested in other people. They were not interested in blessing, encouraging, inspiring, equipping, saving the sheep. All the shepherds wanted to do was care for themselves. And this whole passage is God speaking, saying, I detest the shepherds of Israel, for they have left and abandoned the sheep. And he says in it, so I'm going to come, and I'm going to be a good shepherd, and I'm going to care for the flock, and he says, I'm going to save and seek the lost. So when Jesus says, Zacchaeus, come, and then he says to him, I've come to seek and save the lost. Firstly, he's saying, Zacchaeus, you're still a sheep. Zacchaeus has been told he's unclean. He's not allowed to. People can't come to his home. He can't touch people. He's no longer a sheep. He's no longer what he should be. But Jesus, by saying this line, is making quite a clear statement. Zacchaeus, you're still a sheep. It does not matter where you've been and what you've done and what you've touched. You are still a sheep. That's the first thing. The second thing is, you can see why the Sadducees get really angry at Jesus and want to have him killed. They want to have him killed because Jesus has just said that he is the good shepherd and they're bad shepherds. And he's also implied a third thing. What did everybody else hear? Everybody else heard this. Jesus is claiming to be God. When Jesus said, I am the good shepherd, he's making a statement. He's saying he is the God that spoke Ezekiel 34, and the God that said there are bad shepherds and I will be a good shepherd. Jesus is now saying, I am that shepherd. We often say, why doesn't Jesus make it clear? Why doesn't Jesus say it enough? I am God. Jesus says he is God all the time, but we don't notice it because we don't spot what he's doing. When Jesus quotes from Ezekiel 34, he's saying, Zacchaeus, you're still a sheep. Sadducees, you're bad shepherds. And to everybody else, he says, I am God. So when Jesus uses a line from the Old Testament, we have to look at what does it say before it, what does it say after it, what does that whole paragraph or chapter say? Because Jesus is often referencing a bigger thing by only quoting one little line. And this is called Remez. So we'll look at this in the future. There are time and time again, example after example, where Jesus does this. So I hope you find that really interesting. A, how Jesus teaches. B, that Jesus is seeking, saving lost people. It doesn't matter where you've been, what you've done, you are still a sheep and you've still got a shepherd. And he's also saying to the religious leaders, come on guys, pull your finger out. You are not being the people I've ordained you to be. So I hope you find that interesting. Grace and peace.